Well, especially for your viewers, I mean, a larger loss is these are probably ancient Greek and Roman artifacts that tell us things about past our ancient ancestors. And now that's gone too. So the loss of knowledge, not just the loss of financial, the museum's loss of an object, it's our common loss of knowledge that we should also be considering.
This is Bible and Archaeology News. I'm Jordan Jones, and I'm so happy today to be joined by Dr. Morag Kersel of DePaul University, a specialist in many things, but among them the trade of illicit antiquities, studying this market and understanding how these things operate. I'm happy to have Morag today because we're going to talk in a little bit of detail as best we can about the ongoing situation at the British Museum. This is a complicated and ongoing story, so the news as we're talking about it today could be very different than the news tomorrow. But we want to, as best we can, bring some additional context with Dr. Kersel's help to this story. Dr. Kersel, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for the invite, Jordan. I'm really happy to be here and to talk about this, as you just said, unfolding case, which day by day seems to have take on a different set of meanings or understandings.
Every day there's a different bombshell headline, and so I want to give a quick summary for the viewers in case you read a headline a week ago. It's a little different than the headline today, but for our sense of what we understand right now. About a week ago, reports first came out that a staff member at the British Museum had been stealing items from their collection and selling them on eBay. As reports have gone on, that member has now been identified allegedly as a curator of the Greek and Roman collections, who is also a member of the British Museum's Monuments Men team. Estimates are currently placing items to be around 1,500 to 2,000, though this number is based potentially on speculation as the British Museum hasn't released a list of lost items yet. The situation is ongoing. The director has resigned. The Metropolitan Police are involved in an investigation. Members of Parliament are actively making comments, so the situation will continue to develop. But that's kind of the situation as we know it right now. Dr. Kersel, is there anything I left out that you think should be included too?
No, I think that summarizes it pretty well. I will just say that the director is resigning in 2024. He announced his resignation
Oh.
before this came out, but he will actually stay in place until the spring of 2024.
I had completely misread that. The way they're wording some of these things is ambiguous at best, to put it kindly.
Absolutely. And there are so many moving parts that really every day, as you said, things are changing. And the way that, it's all about getting people to read stories, right? And so if you have a sensational headline like the director's resigning, but you fail to mention that he's resigning in, 6 months, there have been a lot of reports about whether or not Hartwig Fisher, the director of the British Museum's resignation, is related to this, or it's completely unrelated. And that, I think, will, in the coming weeks and months, will maybe become much clearer to us whether or not the two incidents are related.
Well, I want to start with one of these, I guess, sensational questions. For the public, these headlines were jaw-dropping. The numbers are astonishing. The level of the individual is quite shocking in their relationship with the museum. But for someone like yourself who specializes in analyzing and studying the trade of illicit antiquities, did this come to you as much of a shock as it came to us? Or is this, unfortunately, a little more to be expected?
Right. So for the public, I can imagine numbers like 1,500, 2,000 artifacts is stunning. But, we should remember that, and I'm not in any way trying to minimize the theft, but the museum, the British Museum, has over 8 million objects in its collection.
Right.
4.5 million of them are actually on their online catalog, and only 80,000 of them are actually on display. So keeping track of all that is a lot, for a museum to take into consideration. But it's their job, because they hold these items in the public's trust, and they need to know where these things are, and they need to be, there needs to be more accountability. In terms of I don't find it surprising that things have gone missing from the museum. Maybe we find it surprising that someone who worked there for 30 years and who was a respected member of the, curatorial community we might find that surprising. But, people, and this is a part of my research, people become attached to artifacts. We might wonder, like, if indeed he is the thief, why would he want to take these things? Did he love them so much he wanted them for himself or to pass them along to someone else? Was there another party who, it's a demand-driven enterprise, who was interested in these artifacts and then he procured them for that person? I mean, there are a whole set of gaps in this story that I'm sure in the coming months will, come to the fore. We'll get more information.
And in this trying to understand the thief and then become seller's motivations, it is really confusing. One of the articles mentions an artifact was stolen that's valued at an estimated up to 50,000 pounds that he sold on for 50 pounds, not 50,000, 50, right. Which does just baffle the mind. It seems to lack sense for someone who is so respected. But is this kind of just in that complex place of attachment something that we should be a little more suspicious of?
It's an excellent question, and it's really about that collecting mania and the desire to own things. But really, the question of why someone would sell something for such a minimal amount of money, we have to ask ourselves, was it really about financial gain? Probably not. Whereas maybe, we see films like Thomas Crown Affair and all these other things where you see art theft, it's about making money. You're going to make a lot of money if you sell these artifacts. But for this individual, if on eBay they're selling these pieces for 50 pounds instead of 50,000 pounds, it can't really be about financial gain unless he's in it or they're in it for the long game, right?
Yeah.
So, this is another element where we don't have all the information because there've been conflicting reports on whether or not items have been appearing on eBay as early as 2016. In this instance, we're only alerted to it in 2021 by a Dutch dealer who has been buying things from this individual, whereas another dealer also bought a gemstone from that same individual and repatriated it to the British Museum once they realized it was stolen. They gave it back. But the Dutch dealer just alerted the authorities or the people in charge at the British Museum that, these were pieces appearing in the market, especially on eBay, and he thought they were from the British Museum's collection. So there is demand. Somebody's selling these things at a price cut. It's so much more complicated than I think the average art theft that we're used to in the media and in the movies.
Does that relationship that you're talking about there with some of these other antiquities buyers online and the involvement of a curator, does this cast any new light on the market mechanics right now around this trade? Is it moving into a new space?
It isn't really moving into a new space because there have been a lot of studies, Chris Martinello, who has Art Recovery, he's the principal at Art Recovery, suggests that every day or every museum has had theft. So it's not unusual. I think in this instance, what's really unusual is that this is insider theft that probably went on for an extended period of time. Like, it wasn't just a one-off, right? This is someone that had working knowledge of the collection and maybe thought, oh, no one will notice if I take a few things, and then maybe got bolder and bolder over time and took increasingly more things or different things or more expensive things until it finally came to light. And, this Dutch dealer, Gradel, basically, outed the British Museum as maybe not doing as much due diligence and as a thorough investigation into the incident when he first reported it.
One of the articles I was reading was an interview with the director, resigned but still active director, that they, in an investigation in 2020, I think it was, went into one of these rooms that held uncatalogued items that were there to be studied. The room was supposed to have 940 something items, and only 7 were in the room when they went in, which is astounding. But also they said, unfortunately, it seems like he moved from the uncatalogued items into cataloged items at some point as well. And that's kind of where they're starting to begin their investigation now. But it is
So one of the
disappointing.
yeah, it's very disappointing because I think one of the questions that maybe we should all be asking ourselves is why didn't the British Museum contact the police and other investigative authorities in the first instance? They did an in-house investigation after Gradel, the Dutch dealer, alerted them.
In 21.
Yeah, and they basically said there wasn't that, they couldn't really find anything problematic. And then they did a full audit in 2022, and that's when it uncovered that there were thousands, maybe thousands of pieces missing. So at that point, wouldn't you contact the authorities? Because this is out and right theft, right?
Large theft. And they still haven't released a list of what they, and I understand maybe we don't have the full scope, but I have seen a lot of the art detectives or these persons that usually work on these cases saying they're surprised that the museum hasn't released at least a list of what they know is missing or photographs of what they know to be missing, that there's still silence on this front.
I wonder if that's because they actually don't know what they're missing still. They don't have an accurate accounting of everything that they may be missing. And releasing a list might be premature for them.
Then the hopes that things can come back. But as someone who studies this, how hopeful should we as the public be that a percentage of these items will be returned? What are the odds here?
I think they're pretty low because, someone like that Dutch dealer, he's just the middle person, right? He bought them from eBay, but then he sold at a much reduced rate. He sold them on to someone else. Who knows where these things are now in the world? And, that's the nature of connecting the dots to, and this is what makes it so difficult to find stolen art is because it gets sold on and passes through so many channels and so many hands. So, maybe they'll get some things back, but in all likelihood, probably not.
In thinking through this likelihood that we're not going to get these things back, how should we be thinking about the full scope of loss here? A lot of the articles are focusing on potential numbers of things lost or potential valuations of items. Is that the best way for us to try to get our arms around this? Or is there a larger sense of loss we need to be accounting for?
Well, especially for your viewers, a larger loss is these are probably ancient Greek and Roman artifacts that tell us things about our ancient ancestors. And now that's gone too. So the loss of knowledge, not just the loss of financial, the museum's loss of an object, it's our common loss of knowledge that we should also be considering. And one of the other things that we might think about, because many of the articles out there are suggesting, the British Museum should really think, or Western museums should really think about this model of being these safe places for these artifacts, right? If we're going to make this argument that these, the artifacts are better off in the Western world, somewhere in a large museum than somewhere else, then we really need to be doing more to protect these objects so that they don't end up somewhere in some private collection, never to be seen again.
And this is one of those items that in the alleged thief's job description, I saw come up a couple times and has kind of disappeared, is his involvement in the British Museum's Monuments Men team, which is based on the World War II Monuments Men, who are supposed to be, the British Museum quotes them as, responsible for tracing looted antiquities with the aim of repatriating them or putting them on display. Does this enhance kind of the black eye that comes from these thefts and this idea of a safe space in these museums? Does it hurt people like you who are trying to trace and understand these thefts as well in this marketplace?
Absolutely. It makes it much more difficult to try and connect those dots from how things go from the ground to the eventual consumer, whether the consumer's a museum or an individual. And I, like you, noted that in the original reporting, when they announced the alleged individual, they suggested that, not only was he a curator, but he was also a monuments man. But that has disappeared from all of the articles. And I find that supremely, I don't want to say ironic, but interesting.
And he had just been appointed over the Parthenon Marbles as well in the last year after they had started the investigation into these disappearances, which they thought were connected with him.
Right, exactly. And, that's the number one moment right now for the British Museum, is that all eyes are on them and whether or not they're going to repatriate the marbles to Greece. And so immediately the Greek Archaeological Service and the Greek authorities have jumped on, okay, you say that you're protecting these artifacts, but look, you can't even keep account of what you have in your collection and you're missing 2,000 artifacts. Give us back our marbles. And this is a moment where they can really capitalize on that sort of, rationale.
And there have been some members of parliament that are saying this is an unfair time to ask these questions. Is it an unfair time, or is this exactly the time that these arguments need to be enhanced? Because they've been going on for a long time. But is this precisely the moment that they should be upping the ante?
Right. I believe that this is the moment to have a full and transparent conversation for all parties, right? This is the moment we should be having these conversations. And this is just another element in, what we should be talking about. I was just having a conversation with my colleague. We're both teaching classes in museum studies, and I'm putting together my syllabus right now. And I'm telling you, every day I want museums to stop. I can't keep up with every day. There's a new thing that I have to add to the syllabus. Oh, well, now we'll have to talk about the British Museum and the theft, the recent theft, in addition to the marbles. I could do a whole class on the British Museum. It's really hard. I say to my students, I would not want to work in a museum for love nor money right now. It is a really tough job. You are in the public eye. You are under the scrutiny of everyone. But this is the moment where you could be making a difference and changing the conversation and making these places more just, more equitable, and just better institutions for serving the public.
I think that's a fantastic point to leave on. Dr. Kersel, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your insight. We may have to bring you back on depending on where this story goes, but thank you so much for taking the time today.
Well, I'll be teaching it in class, so I'll be up on this every day. Thanks, Jordan. I really appreciate the time.
Thank you so much. For all of us here at Bible and Archaeology, I'm Jordan Jones.